G'day, welcome to the Transport Leaders Podcast. I'm Graham McCabe. I'm a transport planner and traffic engineer with 30 years experience working in the Asia Pacific.
And I'm Russell King. I'm a transport strategist with 20 odd years doing transport policy.
Okay, Russell, I know what we're going to talk about today, but we've got a very special guest here. So do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about autonomous vehicles. So we needed to get somebody on who knows lots about autonomous vehicles at sort of next level of depth. So I'm going to describe our guest as a polymath. He wouldn't describe himself in that way, but I think he is. So let me introduce you to Bern Grush. Now, Bern has decades of experience in all sorts of different areas. He's done human factor psychology, systems design engineering. He's done image processing, environmental satellite scans, um, image recognition and AI, office image systems, autonomous road pricing systems, autonomous parking pricing systems. But in the last decade or so, he's been working on autonomous vehicles. He wrote a book with now 2 editions around autonomous vehicles, which we'll talk about as well. And he's written standards for autonomous vehicles and robots in cities, including ISO 4448, which I'm sure everyone will know, which is the urban robots one, and another ISO as well, 25614, which is about pickup and drop off for robotaxis. So we are talking about someone who is a thought leader in automated mobile systems and urban life. He is also the founder of Pudocity, which is a ground traffic controller for city curbs, which basically means helping autonomous vehicles and cities to manage the curb properly, because that, as we will discuss today, is a significant issue. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Bern.
Well, Russell and Graham, thanks so much for having me. It's been a long journey, as as one can tell from the list you've just read out. I'm kind of blushing from all that, the length of that list, but thanks for having me, and really looking forward to talking about uh, the impact of robotic vehicles on our cities, both robots and vehicles. But I know we're going to focus on robotic vehicles for passengers today. So looking forward to it.
Okay, so you're going to stop the Waymos from circulating in cul-de-sacs in Atlanta, or having massive queues at in San Francisco where they completely block traffic. You've got this solved, right?
Or
So
waking up residents in London in dead ends at 4 a.m. in the morning. There's lots going on at the moment in this space.
There's another one. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of those things that my work does not impact. I mean, there's been a shutdown in San Francisco a few months ago because it was a power failure. Those kinds of things we don't impact. What we do impact is, and I'm talking about the immediate work of this Pudocity. The word Pudocity comes from the word PUDO is pick up drop off. So it's, pick up drop off in the city is where the name of that company comes from. And its product, Curb Reserver, is fundamentally designed to reserve spaces for robotic vehicles to stop and pick up or drop off either passengers or goods. But it's so what it would stop is you mentioned in the last couple of days there's been a viral video of robotaxis in a cul-de-sac. It looked like a dozen of them all stuck down the same dead end. Our system would prevent that sort of thing, but much more dramatically, and I hope we'll get into it later. It will make the roadway safer for cyclists. For example, there's been a cyclist very badly injured in San Francisco in this case, and so on. So it's really about having these vehicles stop in a safe, understood, prearranged space so that they're not blocking traffic and they're not harming cyclists, or they're not in a group of 12 stuck in a cul-de-sac. Those sorts of problems, all kinds of issues like that.
So you've called pick up and drop off the Achilles heel of robotaxis. So you would think, from a common sense perspective, that would be easier than the mechanics of them driving around.
Yeah. Well, the fact is that the principal goal or the principal constraint of mobile robotics, besides the design of the task that they're to perform, is not to hit anything. And so roboticists are very concerned about, as they're getting from one place to another, or whether they're, you know, mopping in a building, or whether they're working in a field. A mobile robot is most of the effort is to make sure it doesn't hit anything. So the concern for a robot to follow a map and to get from A to B is not it's a challenge, but it's mostly a solved challenge. The real problem is that when you want to stop to pick up someone or drop someone off, or pick up goods or drop goods off, the place where one is to do that is not set aside. Think of the analogy that an airplane would come to the airport in your city, but there's no runway. Or there's a runway, but there's no coordination. It's just, when you arrive, land if you can, or circle around until you can, and so on. So if you don't coordinate, and by the way, it's okay if you have a half a dozen robotic taxis, but now we have 1,000 in San Francisco, and by my calculations, that's not enough yet. San Francisco will probably end up, in my calculation, with something like 3,000 or so when it peaks. So it's nowhere near peak yet. And if it gets to that number, I mean, 1,000 is already too many, because we don't manage the curb in San Francisco. So that, as that number grows, it becomes just an impossible circumstance for the people that live there, for the cyclists, for the emergency vehicles, and all that sort of thing, as those are not coordinated at the.
Yeah.
So-
I think the airport analogy is a really good one, right? Because you've got lots of planes. So in this case, that would be lots of autonomous vehicles. But importantly, it's lots of different airlines coming from all sorts of different places.
Right.
Right. And all trying to get to a very limited geographical space, often in a very constrained time. So if you've ever come into Sydney Airport, because of the time zone difference, everybody comes in at, very early in the morning, when the time, because there's a time restriction on the airport to stop people being woken up at 3:00 in the morning.
Right.
And so everyone comes in at the same time. And it's very easy to see how, with autonomous vehicles at scale, in the morning peak, everyone's trying to get to the same place at the same time. And that's just complete chaos, right? And not just in terms of the congestion, but just in terms of trying to drop off a passenger. But,
Right.
But Ben, I mean, one of the things is, when I was thinking about this, right? Anyone who's been to New York, the taxis have got this sorted, right? They double park, they triple park to get rid of their customer, to offload their customers and pick up people. Why is it different with robotaxis?
Well, they're programmed not to do those things, except they have to. That's the only way that they can compete for space. That's one difference. It's also that they navigate much more cautiously, but humans have a large number of sort of social, or you might consider them antisocial things that we do. We have eye contact, and we also have a kind of aggressive and submissive kinds of behaviors. There's some people that will just back down all the time, and there's some people that will butt in all the time. And on average, we sort things out. It's kind of rude, and it sort of gets worse. And then we have mishaps, we have crashes, and we have fights. People have fought over parking spaces, for example. So all of those things together don't work in a robotic environment. And a robotic environment needs to be managed and controlled. And these vehicles currently are super cautious, because their job is not to hit anything, so they won't come close to each other if they can avoid. That's why you'll see them move really slowly. So imagine, a theater lets out, and 400 people exit the theater, and 80 of them call for a robotic taxi. And so in the period of 5 or 12 minutes, you will have 60 or 80 taxis coming to a rather small area. How will they sort? How will that be? I mean, that's difficult if you call that many Ubers at once. That's a problem. Or sorry, I should say ride hail. I don't know. Uber's in Australia, isn't it?
Yeah,
never
Yeah,
sure. There's
yeah. So we use ride hailing, a little less transportation network companies. That's probably more of a
yeah,
North
that's
American terminology, but ride hailing is the, the most common version.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, this the same thing
yeah.
happens there if many people call all at once, and there's no coordination, so you're going to instantly get congestion. But I also want you to consider that while we have several robotic taxis coming to a common place to pick up a few dozen um, ride hailers. Imagine that at that same time, there is a fire or a fire vehicle that needs to get through, or an ambulance that needs to get
Mm.
through. And that's even if the robotic taxis spoke to each other, they don't. But even if they did across multiple fleets, because they're not always with a single dispatcher. In other words, there could be 5 or 6 different robotaxi companies. But even if they were to speak to each other, how do you tell them that there's an emergency and to let the emergency vehicle through and that sort of thing? Those are the kinds of that's when I say orchestration, we're orchestrating not just multiple fleets of robotic taxis, but we're orchestrating them in the face of emergency vehicles, public work shuts sometimes weather circumstances. So there's a lot of reasons to divert or change or set vehicles into assign vehicles a space other than the one they would normally pick because of other circumstances. So
Yeah.
it's a very complex environment mixed with human drivers and cyclists and pedestrians and everything else. So that's I think you can appreciate that we're not going to do this without orchestration. I mean that's it.
Yeah, and we're talking about all freights in there as well, right? People doing drop off deliveries and pickups
Right.
of deliveries. There's a whole bunch of complexities in here about in the same way that our curb space has many uses today, depending on circumstances.
Right.
We need to get better at it. Now, when we say orchestrate, what does that mean? I've heard that term a lot. What do we mean by orchestrate?
Well, um, what we mean by any system, reservation system, whether it's like a runway or a hotel. So hotel orchestration is assigning you to the room that you asked for as close as possible, the schedule you asked for. Imagine, have you ever gone to a hotel and when you go to your room, there's somebody else already in that room? Has that happened to you?
Oh,
Really?
yes.
Yep.
That's a failure.
Yeah.
That's a failure of the reservation system. That hasn't happened to me so far, thankfully.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, when you need to match a service with its in space, it's like a dating system or a reservation system. It's all the same thing. So basically, use the word orchestration or coordination. What we're orchestrating is the time and place that a vehicle needs to be at, and that what time and place means is I'd like to be as close as possible to the front door of a building at so and so. That's what it means to a passenger, and we can't give everyone a spot at the front door all the time. It may be that you need to be let off a small distance away from the front door just so that we can get you to your location. It's the same as when you're parking. You can't always park at the front door, except in the movies. When you're watching a movie, the hero arrives at the front door, walks out of his car, and walks in. But that's not how real life is. So basically,
Yeah.
orchestration is matching the resource required for the demand. So
So does that then end up with basically the curbside being auctioned off, and then you have billionaires, particularly in the case of San Francisco, taking over the curbside and freight having no space for deliveries.
you could auction that space. In fact, I'm just trying to think if my system would permit that. Of course, I could make it permit that, but nonetheless, we don't.
I'll take 0.01 of 1%. for
We're not,
for that
we're
idea,
getting that
because
idea.
that's going to be a moneymaker, I think.
Well, so one of the things that our system permits is negotiation, but it wasn't, and what I mean by negotiation is that you've asked for, I'd like to have a spot within 10 meters of a certain location, and I'd like to be there. I'd like to be dropped off at 9:05. And the auction is, well, I can't give you exactly what you've asked for, but would you take 9:05 at 200 meters, or would you take 100 meters at 9:15? So that's the kind of thing I mean about negotiation, because
Hmm.
promise you, it's the same thing when you call a hotel. I'm sorry, we don't have any king beds. Would you take two queen beds instead? And so there's a
Yeah,
negotiation that goes on between you and any service at all. But that's not the same thing as an auction.
yeah, because I'm thinking of airport landing and takeoffs. They're auctioned
Oh yes,
off.
those
Yeah.
are. So now we're talking about what we would like to do is that the FedEx truck would always like to come in front of a certain building every day, 5 days a week at
Mm.
9:30 always, and have that space reserved for it. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible to do that.
Mm.
Not something that we've contemplated, but that can be done. One thing
Yeah.
that's important, we think, is that when you have loading areas in some cities, there's a loading area and it's signed, and you can only stop there if you're like a step van or a truck delivery truck, and it's very busy during some times of the day, and it's empty at other times of the day. And scofflaw parkers just use it at other times of the day.
Mm.
There's also loading areas that change their intended use over the day. So in certain hours it's for goods, in other hours it's for passengers, and yet other hours it's actually just for parking. And our system provides for that kind of. Again, that's not negotiation, but it permits that kind of mixed parking. And what's interesting is that our system permits that to change over season or over time of day or month and so forth, because parking, the need for the curb space is very, very dynamic.
Mm.
You know, and so we need to be able to handle all of those things. So one of the inputs into our system is the city database for its public works, or for its in its real-time database for its ambulance calls or its EMS services or its fire and so forth. So all of those immediate needs for a space that, those requirements arrive without warning, and we only have a few minutes to respond to them. So our system diverts traffic that's on its way to that space, and it also asks traffic that happens to be there to evacuate in the very shortest time possible, and so forth. Basically, we're clearing the space for those vehicles. Sounds nice, but that's only if there's no other parkers using the same space. So for the next 30 or 50 years, we're going to have humans driving cars. That's not going to go away for a long time.
Yeah.
So what may sound to you like a wonderful sort of computerized coordination is deeply flawed by the presence of human drivers who do what they want to do. I've been asked
Yeah.
many times, can
Yeah.
we use your system for ride hailing? Yes, you can, but the ride hailing drivers won't behave. So
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, Curbman. Go
yeah.
on, Gro.
Yeah, I was going to say, even in so I've been talking about autonomous vehicles since 2014. And yeah, I felt a little bit for the hype at the time, thinking my daughters wouldn't get driver's licenses. They still haven't got driver's licenses, but that's not because autonomous vehicles have come along. They've got the Uber and the ride hailing services of their parents. But
Are you charging your
what?
kids for
No,
pick up and drop off?
no, no, don't give me ideas. But connected intelligent transport systems where the vehicles are talking to each other was supposed to be one of the features of ride-hailing services, and you've talked about this a little bit, But even the vehicles within the same company don't seem to be talking to each other yet.
No, they're not. I mean, have you watched the film? This is I don't know, 12 months ago, or almost whatever, 10 or 12 months. And there was a series of videos. It was it was in San Francisco, and there was a parking area, and it was
and they're all beeping, they're all honking at each other to get out of the way.
So they do talk to each other. That's not what you thought was meant when they say they communicate with each other. They're just blowing horns at each other, which I can do with my car to your car as well. We can blow our horns at each other.
Yeah, and then we can throw invective and verbal abuse followed by fisticuffs.
Yeah, I think one of the things here that's going to be a challenge is the quality of our curb management varies greatly from city to city, right? So if you think about somewhere like New York, right, which has, certainly by American standards, has a very sophisticated transit system, by North American standards, but its car parking is basically free pretty much on the island of Manhattan, right? I mean, it just doesn't do any curb management at all. I mean, it has a whole industry of people who are like reserving parking spaces for people and get paid for it, right? By standing there and things. I mean, it's a very bizarre way of managing the curb.
The city, they're losing $1 billion a week by not. You're familiar with Donald Shoup and the idea of charging a rate so that you have generally as close as possible to an 85% occupancy rate. That's so that if you arrive, there is a 15% possibility or reasonable possibility you'll find a space within a block or two without circling around. And that is such an easy rule to institute and basically you can just update every year. You just take your data and raise or lower your price. And that is why New York won't do that. I don't understand, but it's
I've listened to an interview recently with the new head of the Department of Transport at New York City, or Department of Transportation, I should say, and he has mentioned that it's a bit bizarre that they have free parking in New York still. Whether or not that will turn into political action or not, because it will be controversial, but I think they know it's bizarre and it needs to change. But whether they will do it or not, I don't know. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Chicago, which has sold off its parking, right? It doesn't even have the rights to its own parking anymore. So its revenues will go to a private company, which it basically sold its rights to parking revenue in order to pay off certain debts that it had.
They bailed out. We did the same thing in Ontario. We built a highway. This government built a highway and sold it to a Spanish company that now tolls it. So it was a highway that was I don't know if it was going to be free or tolled, but in any case, the company that purchased the highway now tolls it significantly, and they change the rates every year to match the So as if traffic grows, then they raise the price. It's exactly what they should do. And we complain it's not fair. Well, it is fair because we sold them the road. But that's the same thing. What Chicago sold their parking to Morgan Stanley and somebody else. I can't remember who else. But when they purchased that, you may know that they were undercharging for parking, and it was not politically okay for them to raise the price, but it was politically okay for them to sell the system. And as soon as they sold it, it went up 25 cents per quarter or I can't remember, but it was prearranged to go up 25 cents per hour on a scheduled basis, so that after a period of time, I don't know how long, 18 months, 24 months, the price was by then increased considerably, perhaps doubled or whatever, which is exactly, so had the city kept it and actually had I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but if they had the balls to put the proper price on it, then they would have ended up with much more money and would have control of their own curbs. So they've lost that. They've given it away.
Yeah, it's had loads of negative unintended consequences from it as well, all sorts of things. Yeah. But one of the things we've done across many jurisdictions in order to manage parking in a human-driven world is when there's not enough parking, rather than price it, as you said, we've built parking lots in our downtown areas. Don't worry about all that amenity. Let's just put metal boxes on the street in this space and call them car parking lots, right? in an autonomous vehicle world, okay, they don't necessarily need to be parked, but if are we gonna need to convert them to pick up and drop off spots instead? So rather than get rid of these parking lots, we'll just end up with them as, people using them for pick up and drop off instead.
Well, I want you to consider that this is a very, very long, slow process. So we would like to say, hey, pretty soon we won't need any parking. Well, that pretty soon is like a 40, 50, 60 years, is a long spot. So we need to think about that. So the assumption is that we would have more and more pick up and drop off at the curb. I mean, you don't want to be dropped off on the third floor of a high-rise parking and take an elevator down to go shopping and then go back up to, and so that's not the way you want to get in. You want to get in and out of a robotic taxi somewhere near the place that you're going. And so what we would use such places for, first of all, are human parkers. That's going to stay the same. So as we may start to squeeze parking on street, then if you want to continue driving your own personal car, then and you're still driving, as opposed to it being an automated car, then you would be more likely to start using parking lots than, with a higher probability than now.
That's interesting what you say about the parking situation, because obviously the autonomous aerial taxi mob, they rely on that you land on top of the building and then you go down the elevator to the mall, which makes me wonder, have they actually got their business model wrong?
You're talking about the aerial taxi.
Yeah.
Well, you're not using the aerial taxi to go grocery shopping. You're using it to go from one city to another because you have money to get the aerial taxi, or let's just say you're visiting and you want to come in from the airport and you don't want to spend an hour and a half in Toronto. You can spend quite a while. You could spend quite a while driving to downtown Toronto from the airport. There's a train, but you don't use trains not if you're in Canada, you use your car. So you end up spending a long while on the highways. So what you'd rather do is hop down an aerial taxi. But
this gets back to an interesting point, though. I think back to Graham's point about auctioning, right? Because if you think about it at the moment, people do get dropped off on multi-story car parks. They just happen to drive it to them themselves, right? So people are willing to accept it if it suits their convenience and their utility, right? Now, if we're going to have a shortage of space, at the front door of a building, so it's a commercial tower, 30 stories or whatever, and loads of people want to be dropped off, right? Pricing could be a very good way of managing it, right? So at peak times, I'm sorry, it's going to cost you $10 to be dropped off outside this commercial building, but I can drop you off at the multi-story around the corner, and that'll only cost you $1.50, right? And you're going to have to walk for 5 minutes, but is that your preferred option? And for some people, that'll be their preference, right?
Yeah. Not only will that be the preference, what our system permits or enables is. So I want to distinguish between there's a standard that says here's the data and the method of moving the data, and then there's a system that uses that standard, and that system permits pricing. So one of the things in that system is, I'd like to be at this place and within this radius at this time, and other things. There's a total of about 40 parameters. And one of the parameters is how much am I willing to pay? So I need to be within 10 meters of this place at this time. I can't be late. I'll take anything. And I don't care what the price is. So there's your $10 or your 10 pounds, whatever. And it's also the case that you could say, well, I won't pay more than $1, and you'll end up 3 blocks away on the third floor of some building. That's another possibility. So you're right. And that's done with pricing, but it's we don't yet know how that will turn out because we don't have any experience at all, and nobody does, with pricing robotic taxi pick drop off. That's
a really great point, Bern, because with a lot of this stuff, right, we're talking about not about autonomous vehicles on the road, because that happens in a dozen or so cities now.
Right.
What we're looking at here is, what does it look like at scale? right? That's the thing here. And the answer to that is we don't know yet. San Francisco is our closest thing that we have, and we're starting to see some of the challenges that scale brings. But we're expecting a lot more things to fall over as a result of scale. And that means even if you are a proactive government, and let's face it, the vast majority are not, right? And you're thinking about this and you're starting to plan for this, this is not going to be a set once regulation and then you don't have to worry about it for 10 years, right? You are going to have to be very flexible in kind of setting a first, go at the regulations, seeing their impacts, and then going, okay, this is working, this is not working. We need to change the regulations to get better outcomes as a result of this. And I think one of the skills that governments are going to have to do in managing this is to have much more flexibility around the regulations. So what you don't want to do is set the regulations down in, say, legislation, where you then have to try and get it through a legislative body to get the regulations changed. You want to be setting up a kind of an outline framework through the legislation, as in, what your responsibility you have, and then enabling effectively the technocrats to set the exact regulations based on, the evidence and stuff that they get, right? Because I think you're going to need that flexibility. It cannot be, we'll change the regulations once every decade. It will not work when we're going up a very steep learning curve.
This is a very, very long process. I'm going to give you some numbers about robotic taxis in a moment, but as a preface to those numbers, I want you to consider that the parking meter was invented in 1935. And you just told me or agreed with me that New York City has a lot of spaces that don't have a parking meter. That's 91 years for one of the greatest cities in the world to catch up with Oklahoma City in 1935, 91 years. So we're now with zero orchestration in any city for robotic taxis. We're promised a large number of robotic taxis. We were promised the one extreme, a person named Tony Siva suggested that by 2030, 95% of all passenger kilometers traveled in the world would be by robotaxis. There's now 4 years left. Let me give you the current numbers. In all the world, the proportion of passenger kilometers traveled in robotic taxis is something on the order of 0.0002%. The city with the most robotaxis, San Francisco. So how much of San Francisco passenger kilometers traveled is in a robotic taxi? It's a little less than 1%. You may know that San Francisco has lots of issues with these vehicles not being coordinated, not being orchestrated. I'd like you to try to imagine San Francisco not at 1%, but at 10% or at 20%. The book that I just finished writing is talking about a world of 50%. Like what happens? So the intention of the book is to explore what happens when we get from here to 50%. It doesn't say when, whether it takes us 30 years or 80 years. Like at some point, if we're going to someday get to 95%, whenever in the year 4000, when we get there, we have to get through 50% on the way. What does that look like? And that is a horrible thought. We are so we don't understand that at all. And the scale issues. This is just one. We're just talking about orchestration. It's only one of the scale issues. That's discussed in that book. And there's others. There's traffic rules. There's it's called teleoperations and so on. All of which we haven't explored at all.
No, we haven't. And I think one of the things that is interesting to me with my policy geek hat on is who is going to be responsible for what at different levels of government. So we're already seeing this play out in San Francisco. So you mentioned the very horrible accident that the female cyclist has had. Okay. And just to be clear to the audience about the regulations, most of the regulations on autonomous vehicles in San Francisco are being set by the Californian state government,
Correct.
right? Not the San Francisco city government. And actually, the rules around pick up and drop off are being set at a state level. They're not being set up
Yep.
at a San Francisco level, and that's got some really interesting consequences. Bern, you're doing some work on this in looking at this scenario.
Well, I think I mean, it's an exaggeration to say it's criminal, but it's almost criminal that a city by the way, almost all American cities have had their ability to manage their curb taken away by the governments. And I don't think that the state governments meant it on purpose. I don't think the state government said, let's make sure they can't manage their curb. What the state government says, look, this technology is new. We need to manage the safety. States, and the same thing in Canada, the province is responsible for a driver's license. So I receive my driver's license not from my city, but from my province. And if you're living in California, in San Francisco, you get your driver's license from the state of California. And these automated vehicles have software drivers. So I understand the state saying we, the state, are responsible for these vehicles because that automated driving is with the state. 100% understand that and agree with it. I think it should be. In fact, it even should be national, but anyway, it's state for long historical reasons.
Yeah.
And that's where it should stay. But they accidentally forgot about the curb, because the curb is not in the state's mind. The curb management is not even, if you look up, it's not even in the vocabulary of the state. And that's I'm saying it's an accident. It's just a blunder.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I think where we've ended up with the focus has very heavily been on driving safety.
Yep.
Right. And that's been where the states have focused their energy and the regulation, right? Saying, we need to make sure these things are safe on our roads and driving. And that was the focus. And they hadn't really had anybody in the room who's going, what happens when these things drop people off? How do we know they're doing that safely? Right.
Correct.
And so that got missed. And I think it's a really good example of why we're going to need these regulations to be very flexible in the first few years as we scale, because we are going to be making mistakes inevitably, and we are going to have to learn from them and adapt and change rapidly, rather than saying, well, these are the rules now, you just have to lump it, right? Because a flexible state government would have said, okay, we didn't get the drop off right. We need to give you that power. Right. And delegated it to the cities. And all that's happened in somewhere like the United States is they've all copied California, because that typically that's quite traditional. Right. In the US, many states just copied what the legislation was for California without thinking through whether it's right or not.
Yeah. I saw one of these legislations in writing just several hours ago, and the intent, I understand, the intent was they can't be stopped, they can't be blocked, they can't be given unusual charges, hands off. And it could have been said, okay, you can manage your curb and you can't charge more than 2 cents a minute, or some trivial amount of money, because what the state wanted to ensure is that the city wouldn't interfere with the progress of pilots and the progress of the rollouts and the progress of learning how to use this technology, because the states are concerned about death rates, as they should be. So that makes sense. So don't interfere that. And I understand that, but with a small amount of thought, they could have given the curb without onerous charges to these companies. And by the way, if you were to charge Waymo, if you were to have Waymo pay a fee for pickup and drop off, and just, let's say it's 20 cents a minute or something, guess who's going to pay that? Not Waymo. The passenger's going to pay it. And so
and then some.
There's no loss.
The other thing I would say is that our experience with human-driven vehicles is that managing parking is probably the second most powerful tool we have for managing the demand of vehicles.
Thank you.
Right? It's right. So when we reduce parking, or we charge for parking, or we manage parking more effectively, right? It's a very powerful tool for reducing the demand for driving, and getting people to use, especially if you've got better alternatives, got good alternatives like good public transport or transit.
It was funny when I owned a car for some 50 years. I don't at the moment, but I did for a long while. And I drove it everywhere. There was several decades where I didn't use public transportation. And then parking in downtown Toronto started to get really expensive. So if I was going to go down, I was not going to get away with less than 25 or 30 bucks, period, no matter what. And I knew all the places that I could, and those places were all mopped up. And so I would very often think, I'll find a place and then I couldn't. And then I was really, so I stopped driving downtown probably about 15 years ago, just because of parking pricing.
Huh.
Now, I still drove everywhere else, but I wouldn't go downtown. So you were right. You put the right parking price on, people won't bring their car. I know a lot of people that actually use our subway here just because parking is expensive. Perfect.
Yeah. So when we talk about the actual activity of pick up and drop off, what about pedestrian and cycling safety? So you've mentioned that there is that issue, but I'm thinking city streets, if the vehicles are safe and shy when it comes to interacting with people in the cities, then won't you possibly have the ride-hailing services saying, oh, well, we have to get these pesky pedestrians out of the way. They keep on walking in front of the vehicles and stopping them. Yes, we know we can charge because it takes longer, but our customers are complaining that they're being held up by people who just walk everywhere in front of our robotaxis.
Yes. I keep hearing that is expected to be a problem, and I don't know how much of a problem that will be. It is now as they're novel, and it seems to me young males. I don't know if that's
coning them.
Yeah, well, that didn't last for long. I mean, are they still doing that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I
Anyway,
think that will be like when bike shares started coming. The dockless bikes came out, and people just put them in trees and things.
Yeah.
It's like it happened everywhere to begin with, and then people got bored of it and moved on. And I suspect the coning will be the same. When they first arrive, people will try all these things, and then they'll just move on and do something more interesting.
I'm thinking of more of people just going, oh, I can cross the street because it's a robotaxi and I'll have to stop for me. And then the robotaxi customer complaining, and then someone in a robotaxi company who's not risk adverse, turning the aggressivity of the vehicles up.
I don't know this. I don't know what solution we'll end up using. I suspect that if it becomes a long-term problem and it just doesn't go away, there will be remedies for it. I don't know what I'm not going to suggest. I mean, I can guess what some could be, but I don't know what the remedy will be. But there will be a remedy for it if it continues.
Well, I think we just don't want to have a jaywalking Mark II scenario where I suppose 50 years time the robotaxi takes a photo of you and it gets linked to your driver's license and you cop a fine in the mail type of thing. Well, sorry, identity documents because you may not have a driver's license anymore.
Yeah. Well, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't like that kind of a resolution, but that's not out of the question.
Yeah. I think just from history of these type of companies and their attitude to other road users, and curb space.
I mean, it's a really interesting. I mean, Graham, it's a really interesting point, right? I think it's so. When we're talking about autonomous vehicles being 1% of the fleet, right? The safety of the roads and stuff is pretty much the same as it is now, right? You're not going to be stepping in front of vehicles generically, right? The question in my mind, though, is that we know that when roads get safer, people also choose to walk and cycle more as a result. And so I wonder whether you end up with, when you get to higher percentages of autonomous vehicles, you actually end up with more multimodal roads. So not necessarily need a dedicated cycle lane, but because people feel a lot safer, they'll actually just cycle amongst the autonomous vehicles. And if you're doing that, then it kind of just changes the dynamic again, doesn't it? In a sense of, what you now got is a mixed use road between, cyclists and autonomous vehicles of various different types. It'll change the dynamic again, and whether or not the pedestrians crossing will be a really interesting one in that space. I think
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. Many imponderables at the moment of what the impact will be. Sorry,
Yeah.
Ben, you're going to say something.
Well, we don't know what the pricing will be like. So today, right now, I understand that Waymo and other consumer available robotaxis are a little bit more. They're like 10 or 50% more than a ride-hail ride usually. I've heard sometimes they're matching, but I generally understand they're a little bit more. At some point, they will come down in price to match, because at some point, the ride-hailing companies, the robotaxi companies would like to dominate the field, and the way to dominate, bring their pricing under the ride-hailing companies. The problem is there's the jobs and the people, and there's a lot of social pushback and political pushback. So there's not going to do that precipitously, but they will creep that way over time. So my concern is that if they become really, really inexpensive, which is, what happens when a robotaxi is a quarter of the current price of a ride hail. If that were to happen, then people that would have taken a bike now decide to take a robotaxi. So the opposite can occur. I don't want to see that happen. I want to see as many of us as possible on trains, on long. I don't have a problem with small automated shuttles displacing buses, because they're still on a public transportation vehicle. But I have a problem with single user robotaxis displacing bicycle use, for example, or displacing bus use, and so on. So how do we balance those? This is a very different conversation. This is not about orchestration. This is about how do we set prices so that that all the other modes that are either healthier or cleaner or take less space are not displaced by these robotaxis. It's a very different problem, and it turns out that the orchestration system that I've written a standard for, if correctly monetized, can actually, even if the robotic companies want to compete with all the other modes, the pricing from the city can suppress that to the extent that can defend its other modes. So
can it do road pricing as well as pick up and drop off pricing? So road user charges, Ben?
Well, it actually does. I don't usually talk about that, because right now this is about pricing the pickup and the drop off. So it's that many cents a minute to stop in that location at that time that you've asked for.
One of the other things. Sorry, go on.
It does turn out that if the city permits us to distinguish the pickup from the drop off, so the system does not distinguish pickup and drop off. It just says you need a space. So it doesn't say you're needing a space to pick up Russell or drop off Russell. In fact, Russell's not involved, and it may be that we're moving a package and not a person. So the person's name and the purpose is not known, and the pickup is not known. If, however, you say, okay, we're picking up a person, how many? Because we might want to charge differently in terms of, we want to encourage 3 people, but not 1 person, and so on. So if we know how many, and it is a person, and when to pick up and drop, then we have road pricing built in automatically. It's free. Because if I'm picking you up at A and picking a person up at A and dropping a person off at B, I know that they went from A to B, and I can charge that. I can calculate the charge.
But Ben, how does that work? Because one of the things that I'm concerned about is, well, not in the case of robotaxis, but in terms of robo-freight, robotic freight vehicles, they come in many different forms, some of which are using the sidewalk, some of which are using bicycle lanes for deliveries and things.
Yeah.
For me, you need to charge them as well for that infrastructure, because otherwise you create a distortion which says, well, if I put a vehicle on the road, which might be the best option for many people for the system, well, I have
Uh-huh.
to pay. But if I use the cycle lane or if I use the sidewalk, I don't have to pay. Therefore, that's the best option. And that may not be a desirable outcome, making it worse for pedestrians and cyclists. Does your system cope with that as well?
I agree with you. So the system that we've been talking about is designed for the curbside, so the curb has the sidewalk side and has the road, the motor vehicle side. So it's designed for the motor vehicle side. There is a different standard as part of the 4448 series, and that standard is for orchestration of robotic robots on the sidewalk. It's a very different problem because what that's orchestrating it's not orchestrating the A to B. It's orchestrating how many are in one place at once, because we want to prevent a high number of robotic, for example, delivery robots or sidewalk robots being in the same intersection at the same time. It's a very different problem. What
Yeah.
Robotaxis, we can't have two robotaxis in the same spot at the same time because you get double parking. But if you have an intersection and say I'm okay with one robot crossing at the same time I'm crossing, how about two? Well, okay, two. How about 22? No, that's outrageous. And so how do you do that? How do you make sure that as random robotic delivery vehicles are doing whatever they're doing from 3 or 5 different companies, how do you make sure that you don't have a clump of 12 of them all gathered at the same intersection at the same time? And that's a different element of the standard, and it requires a different body of software. And we don't do that yet. I'm intending to work on that, but you can tell from my white hair that somebody better start moving, because I'm not going to be here for 30 more years. So cities better hurry up and get their act together if we're going to solve these problems.
Well, speaking of cities, what's the role of the different levels of government? So is there a national, government role in this? Because obviously they set the high level, standards that have to be followed. But what else is their role?
For orchestration, I would say not. So there's two halves to my answers to your questions. If you think about delivery robotics, then I think the federal government in every country, and even international, we should be worried about hazardous goods, and we should be worried about weaponization. By weaponization, I mean that you can use, for example, a mobile robot to interfere or intervene in a hostage situation. So in other words, it's owned and operated by a police department or a military department, and its role is to deal with a hostage crisis. And so such a vehicle, for example, and you've seen videos of them with guns, which I am completely against. But you can weaponize these vehicles with sound, very, very loud sound, which you can disable somebody with sound, like over 85 decibels harms your hearing. You can disable them with gas. You don't have to harm a person to disable them, to disarm them, which in fact is a lot safer if you can disarm somebody robotically. Anyway, I'm going along too much for this, but I do think that weaponization and hazardous goods ought to be dictated at a federal level, at least, or maybe even international. And there are international lists of hazardous goods. Which one of those can be moved in which circumstances and so forth.
I also think you'd want to, you talked about the standards.
Right.
All right. And these are international standards, aren't they? They're the ISO standards.
Yes, those are.
You want to make sure that the national government says these are the standards we're going to use. Because if we don't want to have, half the jurisdictions using the ISO international standard and another half of the jurisdictions in a country going on using different standards, right, and making their own standards as they go along, right? That would be a pain for everybody.
That's ideal, but worse than that is, for example, I'm sorry, 5 or 6 states in Australia. I should know better. I think there's 6 states in Australia, and you would like to have
You've got that right. Yeah.
we would like to have all 6 of them to have the same rules. It's okay if you have a different set of rules than China has, I mean, or that France has, but you better have all the same ones in your country. So that's, for me, that's the minimum. But again, that's a weaponization of hazardous goods, because I'm going to answer the rest of your question, is that states, because we have 3 levels in Canada and 3 levels in the United States. Do you have 3 transportation levels in Australia? National, state, and city as well?
Cities only for the streets themselves, so they don't actually generally provide direct services in terms of transport. So they don't run the buses or anything like that.
Yeah, sometimes we have 3, sometimes we have 4. So in Queensland, they've got powerful city governments. So in that case, they've got federal, state, Queensland, and then city, say the city of Brisbane. And then in a lot of other places, they've got 4 levels of, in a way.
Yeah, we'll have that. We will have, in some places in North America, we'll have what we call regional or county, is commonly in the case of in the U.S. So there's multiple levels. Anyway, whatever level in whatever country is involved in licensing, and it's state and province in North America, that should be responsible for, obviously, for licensing related issues, and the city should be responsible for street and intersection issues. So I do see a role in a multi-level government. I do see multiple levels of roles.
Yeah.
That won't be the same everywhere. That'll be different in different places. But all the standards that I work on are really at the municipal level.
Yeah. So Bern, obviously, these autonomous vehicle companies are already got huge amounts of money. In places like the United States, they have huge lobbying power already. And we're starting to see reports of them providing donations to various electoral accounts and things like that.
Yeah.
But is pick up and drop off a threat to them in terms of curb management, or is it something that they should be supporting?
If done correctly, it should not be, because first of all, if you have a well-designed and well-managed pickup and drop-off network, when I say well-designed and well-managed, I can always find a place pretty close to what I've asked for and pretty close in time. In other words, if I can't go there for an extra hour and a half, that doesn't work. I'm just going to go and double park. I'm going to break the rules. But if I can get close in time and space to what I'm asking for, almost all the time, except there's an emergency. I mean, there's a waterworks emergency. I can't get there. Well, nobody can get there. If it's well managed, these companies are much better off, because they have a place they can rely on. We're talking about 3 nines or 4 nines, almost always a place they can rely on. Go in, get in and get out, pick up or drop off. And then they can make more trips instead of circling or looking or hunting or taking a while to match up with their rider. Everything is orchestrated or is coordinated, and they would be able to make an extra couple of trips a day. So they would actually get more value from their fleet, and they're passing the cost on to the passenger anyway. But that is a well-managed system. If the city manages badly and all the city does is write citations, because they've done a horrible job of it, that's a negative. So you have to have both. You have to,
So they should be lobbying for good pickup drop off, right? That would be
lobbying for a good pickup and drop off network. They should be lobbying for that. They shouldn't be lobbying to pay money. They should be lobbying for a good network, and they pay for it, and they pass it on.
Yeah, they should be paying for the orchestration. Lobbying for the orchestration.
Yes. Well, yeah, though I wonder if they will just take the usual approach of move fast and break things and then deal with the consequences later.
That's what they're doing now. That's what's happening in San Francisco, effectively, right? I think the question is
Yes.
whether their experiences will get them to shift and go, well, actually, we could do with some orchestration on the pickup and drop off. That would help. It'd be an
Well,
interesting one.
I actually think that Waymo wants things to go smoothly. Waymo does not actually want to hit the cyclist in the bike lane. They might say, I've heard it said, and I don't have evidence that Waymo said this, but I've heard it said on behalf of Waymo that, oh, well, it's too hard for us to find a place. We have to use the bike lanes. I don't know if somebody really said that. And if a spokesperson said that, they should be terminated. But anyway, I don't think
Yes.
Waymo actually wants to harm anybody. I think they want smooth operations and they want to grow as quickly as they can without political. But I do want to point out something interesting about what just happened with this the cyclist in San Francisco is that she is sued, and her lawsuit is for product malfunction. The product being the Waymo vehicle sensor wasn't working for the door to open, and because the sensor wasn't working, the passenger was able to open the door into the bicycle lane. And so the reasoning is that if the sensor was working, she wouldn't have been harmed. And you promised the sensor working. You Waymo promised the working sensor, so your product failure is caused. So you need to pay. So had there been, for example, a proper pickup and drop off network, and the Robotaxi was using the proper pickup, first of all, the accident wouldn't have occurred. But now I want you to go a couple years in the future when there are cities that actually have proper pickup and drop off networks, and San Francisco says, no, thank you, we're not going to do that. And another one of these mishaps occurs, then the liability would be partly with the city. Because it turns out that if there is a solution, just think about traffic. So if there's a solution that makes the road safer, and the city knows about that, and the city has decided not to use that solution, and somebody is harmed because of not having used that solution, then that party has recourse to suit to the city. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm probably not explaining this very well, but it is incumbent on the city to make its streets as safe as it understands that it can. So right now it can't make its streets any safer because the state said no, and there's no space. And so now we have, these kinds of injuries happening.
Yeah. So Bern, if you are a city or a jurisdiction that sees autonomous vehicles coming, they're about to come onto your roads, London being an example, they're being tested, and you're going like, okay, we need to get ahead of this. We need to sort out the pickup and drop off challenge. What should they do first? What are the first steps they need to take to start moving things forward?
Well, in parallel, you have to identify the network. So it's a non-trivial mapping problem, because it has to be at, suitable places, suitable distances. If you design a bus network, you have to design it so that X% of your population is within 400 meters of whatever those rules are. So you need to set a rule that says we're going to have a pickup and drop off within X meters of whatever.
Yeah.
And you can't always do that because maybe there's a park there, or maybe there's a whatever. And so you have to, where are you going to put? So that's a lot of work to identify that, because by the way, you're not identifying 30 pickup and drop off spots. Like in San Francisco, if you do two per block face, we're talking 4,000, 5,000, or 6,000 spots. And it's not uniform. It's just like put one on the northeast corner of every intersection. No, it's not that easy.
Having had to do this for things like car clubs,
well, there you go,
and pick up and drop off for round stations, tube stations in London.
Well, how are you?
The controversy around that, I know how difficult this can be. You're right, absolutely right. This is not an easy task, right? It's not just the amount of stuff it's got. The politics involved in it are challenging as well.
That's another thing. So you have a perfect map, and then that retailer says no, or that church says no, or whatever. I mean, there's all of those local, minuscule, microscopic political issues not in my neighborhood issues, and so
why
on.
is this for an autonomous vehicle? Why is it not for a human-driven vehicle? Right? All those sorts of challenges we're going to
On
have
and
is the
on and
next
on.
level.
I don't want that near because I heard they run over cats. You know that, so I don't want that near my neighborhood, and so on. So there's going to be design complexities and barriers like that. So that's one part. That's a long time. If San Francisco said, "Geez, Bern, you're right. We'll start tomorrow," it's still going to be 18 months before this. Hey, we finally located all the spots, except for a few we're still fighting over, but we're ready to go. Second part is that you need to say to the vehicle operators, the dispatchers, however many company, like right now it's Zoox and Waymo in several cities, or it might be Baidu or Apollo Go in Dubai, for example. You have to say to them, we're going to have a pickup and drop off network. We will license you to operate in our city, but you have to be orchestrated. And we, the city, whether it's Dubai or whether it's San Francisco or whether it's Atlanta, we, the city, are going to run the orchestration, and you have to, you can't land in our airport without a flight plan. No, you can't do that. So you can't run your robotaxi without being orchestrated. Now, you go into a city that already has, Waymo's already running in San Francisco. Waymo says, "Oh, no, thanks." I don't blame them. It's just too much trouble they're stumbling along as they are. But go to New York City, and Mayor Mandani has not extended the testing license to Waymo. Good on him. Now he comes back, if he were to understand that this was possible, which I doubt he does, but let's just say he was told that, why don't we invite Waymo back if they'll let us orchestrate them? Because, we could, first of all, pay for, we could capture a lot of revenue. They could look at it that way, or we could make people want robotaxis, and here's how to make it work. And so whatever the reasoning is, Waymo would say yes instantly.
He's looking for revenue to pay for his free buses. Here's an opportunity.
For example, but the thing is, if the answer is no, you can't operate in New York, or yes, you can operate if you're orchestrated, what do you think Waymo would say to that?
Yeah.
And the same in Toronto. Toronto is saying no. Toronto doesn't actually have a decision. It's the province here that says yes or no. But nonetheless, Toronto is also saying no. Toronto has banned sidewalk robots. In December of 2021, they banned sidewalk robots. And I congratulated them for that. And that's my work. My work are sidewalk robots. So I said, we did the right thing because our city is not ready for it. So Toronto's right to say, hold on to robotaxis. But if Toronto said, let us orchestrate, Waymo would say yes, for sure.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Those are the first two steps. You have to find your network. By the way, the definition of network is how much you're going to charge for this is part of it. Where are they? What's the schedule? What's your rules for using it? One of the rules being you're paying this amount of money, and so on. And
are you going to auction the spaces? Yeah.
Well, you could. So it's not an auction as in when you're auctioning off a landing slot that you get 7:30 every Tuesday. That's not what I was thinking of for auction. Auction would be that there's two robotaxis that want to use the same place at the same time, and I really, really have to be there at 9, and you can wait. And so I want to go first. Not that we know each other personally, but that I have told my taxi I cannot be late, and you told your taxi you're a little loose, and so now the two taxis negotiate. So it's all mechanical.
Yeah. I love it. Behavioral based transport planning.
Yeah, that's something that could be done, but that's not what you meant by an auction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I think. Well, I didn't mean landing spot specifically, but more I suppose your instant commodities trading. The curbside is a commodity, and it's if you're going to be there at 9:05, then how much are you willing to pay to be there at 9:05?
One of the issues is that there's nothing that stops us from having a system that lets you reserve far in advance. So for example,
Mm.
it's a few years from now and you own your own personal driverless vehicle, your own vehicle, just your private vehicle in your garage, but it has no steering wheel. You actually need to be orchestrated because you can't just like go there and arrive. You need a place for your vehicle to stop somewhere and let you out. So you would actually have to be orchestrated, your own private personal vehicle. You're a fleet of one. You are the only dispatcher. You only have one vehicle in your fleet. You still need to be orchestrated. Nobody thinks about that, but you would have to be. Make sense?
Yeah,
It does.
absolutely.
And I wonder whether Tesla would be happy with that, because they're the most likely party to be the
So
private.
now what you do is you would like to go, you're a very regular scheduled person, and you would like to be dropped off at 10 before 9 exactly in the same place every day, no matter what. And you just reserve ahead. Like you reserve ahead the year. And then the problem becomes there's now an emergency and you have to be displaced. And so how does that work out? So we think that we're going to ask the cities. We don't have control over this, but the city says you can't reserve more than a certain period of time. So you don't want to have FedEx reserving that spot for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
You need or you say, yeah, you can reserve ahead, but the further you reserve ahead, the more it costs. 50 cents to reserve tomorrow, $1.50 to reserve on 2 days from now. And
you could see Chicago auctioning off a parking spot for the next 50 years for somebody, right?
You sure can.
Well,
So
they
Way
did.
up front.
every one of these schemes is a computable scheme. Every one of them has political questions. Every one of them has equity questions, fairness questions. Somebody, I think Graham, it was you that said, well, are these just going to be for billionaires that can afford to get off right in front of the building?
Mm.
If we have auctions and we have reservations, and sure, I'll pay for that reservation, because I'm wealthy and so on. So how is that? So the third thing I didn't, when I answered your question about how the city get ready, a city start thinking about some of these equity issues. And to the earlier point made in this conversation, it's going to take us a long time to work out all these things.
Yeah. It's a very good point.
Just on this call, you brought up 3 or 4 things that, I haven't thought about that.
I'm glad you found it useful then.
Well, that's good.
I certainly learned a lot from today's discussion, so thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we live in interesting times. That's for sure. That's for sure.
Oh, yes, we do. We very much do.
I do feel very cursed. Look, I think this has been a fantastic chat, and to wrap up, is there anything that we've missed in the discussion that you think our audience should know?
Well, yeah, many things. Not sure.
Do we need to come back for a second episode?
Yeah, leave a few months in between for people to digest this.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Just so picking one thing, and this is we touched on a little bit. This is really about scale, and I'll tell a little anecdote. I gave you the numbers that we're supposed to get to 50% or 90% or some number like that, and we're really at 0.00%, or even in the busiest city, we're at 1%. But you need to consider the agony of getting from wherever we're going to. Let's pretend I'm right, and that in 30 years we end up at 50%. Just imagine that's the case. You've got to get to 10%. You've got to get to 15%. I was at a conference. This was just after I published the first edition of The End of Driving, and I met a professor there who was aware of the book, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing next?" And I said, "I'm writing a book called The 10% City." What's that? I said, "Well, that is what we have to do to get to 10% of the vehicle miles traveled in a robotic vehicle." She said, "Oh, that's nonsense. We need everybody in a robotic vehicle." And she walked away. I wanted to say, well, you understand, in order to get to 100%, you got to pass through 10% just to get there. And it was almost magical thinking that we could go from 0 to 100, like, maybe by next Tuesday we'll get there. and completely unrealistic. And this is the kind of thinking that's been going on for the last 20 years, not understanding how we're going to creep through this. How are we going to stage ourselves through this? That's so the single biggest thing we're not understanding is how we get from 0 to some other number, 30 or 50 or whatever that number is. We're not thinking about it. We're not scaling for it. We're not prepared for it.
Yeah.
We haven't even asked the question.
A lot of the theoretical models around autonomous vehicles have been on the assumption that every vehicle on the road is an autonomous vehicle and the benefits that you get from that. But as you say,
a waste of time.
Yeah, it's so far ahead. It's so theoretical. It's pie in the sky. We actually need more work done on what does it look like at 10%? What does it look like at 20%? How do we deal with those challenges?
Can you imagine a world there's no cancer, there's no racism, everybody is born perfect? This is so unrealistic.
And I think John Lennon wrote a song about that, didn't he?
Which one? Which song?
Imagine.
Yeah, it was you were talking about Imagine. Yes. Yeah. No, we're not ready, and we're not even ready to think about being ready. That's the sad part.
All right, I think we're going to have to do a second part at some point, Bern, and come back. Hopefully, when maybe 1 or 2 jurisdictions have taken up the need for
that would be a great
pick up and drop off and see what they're doing. That'd be great.
If somebody would get started with do this, I think our first one is probably going to be with human-driven vehicles, because cities, every time we go to a city, say, oh no, we need help us with ride hailing. Probably we're going to do that, and it's going to have a lot of rough edges. It's just they're not machines; those are humans.
They are indeed.
Excellent. Well, we will look forward to you coming back. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. I hope everybody watching and listening has found it really interesting. And if you want to help us get more great guests like Bern, drop us a like, share the podcast, and if you're feeling really generous, buy us a bus or train ticket over on Patreon. Thank you, Bern.
No, thank you for having me. Take care.
Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Bern. Brilliant to be talking to both of you.
We'll see you next week.